Welcome to Jar of Genius. I'm your host, Russ Perry, and this is a podcast where we dive into the business of creativity. Each episode, I'll explore the minds and stories of innovative leaders and companies who have paved the way and are shaping the future for creative businesses around the world. From groundbreaking business models to extraordinary creative campaigns and the innovations of technology we use and will use ahead, I'm excited to help you not only run a creative business, but thrive in this ever-changing and always challenging landscape.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Jar of Genius. I'm your host, Russ Perry. And today we have someone coming to you not quite so live from Nashville, but that's Tiffany Hardin, who is the CEO of the Gild Creative Group. And as I was going through your background, Tiffany, I could list like 20 other amazing things that you've done professionally in your career. You've been a professor at NYU. You've worked in the entertainment industry, which I'm sure you have some crazy stories about that. But we're here today because you are a champion in terms of the way brands are connecting with their customers and doing that through content, doing that through the social platforms that are, I guess, kind of popular today. And I'd love to hear how you ended up here, because you've worked inside of brands, with brands, for brands, companies like WeWork, all these cool things. At some point, you're like, you know what? I want to do it differently. I want to do it myself. And actually, before you get to your answer, I laughed reading your bio because you self-reference as an OG in influencer marketing. Kind of like, man, are we getting older? You know, like I'm now an OG. I'm not like cracking the ice on new stuff. But yeah, I'd love to know, like your point said, you know what? My gift in this world and the value I want to bring is helping connect this new media marketplace, people and brands and content. It just seems like something that takes a lot of conviction.
You know what? I really appreciate the way you framed that question. And I will tell you, it really started when I was in high school. I was one of those kids that I sang, I was in show choir, I was doing a kickball change, I was doing all of those things, right? But I also knew I didn't want to teach kids music. I wanted to be in the music industry. And I didn't know how to do that because that wasn't an industry that was as prevalent as it is today. There weren't a lot of colleges outside of Berkeley College of Music that were doing music business degrees. And so it took me a minute to kind of figure out what is it that I wanted to do. And so I was watching Making the Band. So I'm dating myself, but I was watching Making the Band, and there was a guy that came on the screen and it said talent manager. And I was like, well, wait, what is that? And I started Googling or whatever I was doing. If it wasn't Google at the time, I might have been using Netscape Navigator for all I know.
Yahooing or, I don't know.
Yahoo, whatever it was. And this is the early 2000s. And so I ended up looking up what talent management was and then finding all of these books and realizing oh, wow, I think I want to use my creative mind and I think I want to use my operational mind. And this is the best way to do that because I knew through some other experiences, I didn't want to be on stage. I love singing for me and the Lord at this point, but not, I don't want to do that for a living. And so it was really helpful for me to kind of get that download. And I went to college for talent management. I was managing bands in high school. And I remember putting their EPK together and being like, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. That was the seed of an idea. So then I went to college, started working with talent managers and, really cool places. And then another seed happened where I was living in New York City and I was in a position where I needed to have a little bit more security in my work. And so I ended up going to interview for this marketing agency. And the owner of that marketing agency happened to come from the music business, is one of the most successful Black-owned agencies that we have today. And he didn't even interview me. He just was like, you got it. And I was like, well, okay, after I was already hired. So I was like, hi, I'm your new assistant. Then I ended up learning from that experience was we were in a perfect storm in culture. And so in that, social media was growing. The iPhone was just coming out. Front-facing cameras were new. There were so many things happening in culture. At the same time, there were brands that were saying, oh, we can work with other people besides actors and musicians to sell products, services, and ideas because these other people have these audiences of regular people that are just interested in what that person has to say. And then we decided to call them creators and influencers. And so I came up during this era where I had all of these relationships with folks in culture that could be supportive towards, putting ideas out in the world. And in the agency, I ended up being someone who was like strategic and could bring people together and say like, oh, let's hire these people for that Bud Light campaign or for that whatever campaign that we were doing. And they'll post and they'll put it on their blog or they'll do whatever, and ended up being sort of like the early stages of what is now like influencer marketing. And when that started to happen, I was young at the time and I was like, oh, I can do this for this agency. I can do this for anybody. So there are these little seeds that started happening. I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know what was going to be the onset for me moving on my own. And so at that point, I was like 27 when I left for the agency, and I started doing a lot of solopreneur work and got to have a lot of great experiences. Went inside WeWork eventually from doing some consulting work, and then ended up saying, you know what, actually corporate's not for me. And which kind of worked out in my case, considering it was WeWork. And then I ended up saying, you know what, let me really actually invest the time, the energy, the space to grow my agency. And we're going to focus on how we work with brands. This is the mission of the company now. We help brands that want to strengthen their relationship between their consumers and their communities. And the idea of the relationship is really important to us because what we always have known, and my personal truth, is that we work in the economics of trust, and influencer marketing in particular is all about trust. And so if we're thinking about how we move through our relationships and who your closest friend is, there's a huge piece of trust that's there. And so in terms of how we work on the other side and just my personal mission in general, I believe when we use our social and our creative capital, we can create positive wealth outcomes for our communities. And I think that for creators, influencers, whatever you want to call them, and even ourselves, just every human, when you tap into that, you can really bring a lot of good, positive, not just only work into the world, but you can be the spark for someone else to have that seed, so that they can achieve their goals and their dreams and start on their path.
Yeah.
So that was a long-winded way of telling you how I got.
So I got like 1,000 questions, but I'm going to actually bring it back to kind of like high level on your journey. But this is also to get inside your head and understand this to teach people. So you mentioned these influencers that, we grew up with, and these are these athletes and celebrities and people that have accomplished really huge things. I think about Michael Jordan, Bulls championship. My youngest daughter studied Amelia Earhart. She was super famous for something really simple like flying across the ocean. But then something's changed. And my question to you is, what is the relationship today between these influencers, creators, you could even call them celebrities? Because I feel like when I see them and the influence that they command, they're not accomplishing these world-changing feats. They're not winning NBA championships, or not many of them. Some do. And I'm like, what is the thing here? What is it? Still aspiration? Is it trust? Is it familiarity? What are you seeing as the driver for this influence in this new economy of attention and connection and trust?
I think that's an incredible question. And I relate to it a lot because I too wanted to be like Mike. So I'm going to go to North Carolina, all this stuff, but I did none of those things. But I think what it really comes down to, yes, it's aspiration, but it comes down to trust. What is it that is a reflection of myself that I'm seeing or desiring in this person that I'm following that is reflecting something back to me? Like, what is this mirror? And when you think about the people you have to mute, there's some people I've muted because I was like, I don't need to be listening to this. But then there are other people that I've muted where I was like, this truth is talking too loud for me, and I don't know if I'm ready to receive. So it's like, there's sometimes a bit of a mirror that's being reflected. And on the flip side, that's like sort of the ethereal aspirational version of that. But when it comes to the other side of influencer marketing as a means to sell, there are people who have done the work of convincing people that they are trustworthy. And so therefore they're being followed, which is a funny term in of itself. But also that's a captive audience that's potentially ready to buy from you. And I think that when you have that kind of trust, you can wield that in a way that's going to be supportive or destructive. And we've just seen that across the board when it comes to media in general and how media is treated. So it really comes down to the influencer and how they feel about growing an audience and serving their audience with their point of view. And there are people, let's think about this, like Jay-Z, for instance. He doesn't do anything on social media. I think it was like one time when he was launching something, it may have been a book, I can't even remember, where he did Twitter Spaces live and was just answering questions. And it may not have been even Twitter Spaces. I think it was just like an AMA. And that was amazing for all of us because we're like, Jay-Z never does this, ever. He's not even on social. You know that he's lurking on a Finsta, or some type of fake account, but he's never actively using the platforms as a means to demonstrate his points of view, right? Or anything really. And he's in his 50s at this point, but no one can deny the fact that he is highly influential. So one of the things that I say is be influential in real life. Have a point of view in real life. And if you choose a medium like a social media platform, even a great email list or whatever you're doing, TV, the mediums will always change because technology will always change. But whatever it is that you're doing, having a point of view and gathering an audience is, to me, the story as old as time. I think in today's era, because we have brands that will pay someone to do that, that is where it gets a little dicey because we want to be able to trust that even if someone's getting paid to say this cookie is the best cookie or this toothbrush is the best toothbrush or whatever, you want to be able to trust the person that's saying that to you. And very often we've learned that there are some things that people can't sell because we don't believe you. And you could be a consumer of that product and you could be an influencer and it could be yeah, we just don't want to hear about how much you love chicken nuggets. If you're selling us music or if you're selling us a different aspect of the brand that you've projected for years, people will tell you. People will tell you very quickly.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of that is when Garth Brooks wanted to be emo artist out of nowhere and became Chris Gaines. That actually could have worked for him to change his style without the ridiculousness of the black wig with the bangs and everything else. But somebody in his team told him, well, you're country and you're a country legend. And if you want to create a different type of album, then you have to create a different kind of persona to go along with it. And that was obviously a misstep because we couldn't even listen to the music because we're so distracted about why are you on SNL with this wig on when we know what is happening here? And we never heard from Chris Gaines again. It just silently went away.
Yeah. As you're sharing this, I think a lot about ways that people in modern space, modern time, find and research. And I think there's kind of two buckets and they take various forms. One is the searching of the aggregation of data. So I go to a browser or some sort of index or directory. And the reality is the results often in those efforts are gamified. You can pay for it, you can optimize it. There's frequently not a lot of authenticity in what is being presented. On Amazon, there's ways to juice the ratings or whatever. And so you're like, okay, I don't think much about that. So maybe I want to, find something with a better filter. And then you're like, well, now let me go to someone who I believe I can trust and I identify with. And it seems to me that this is someone with similar tastes and interests. But there's always a little bit of a filter you might have to also have, right? And I think that's probably one of the bigger decisions your clients have to make, right? Is if we are going to try to leverage these audiences' trust, how do we do it in a way that is not going to seem cheesy, for lack of a better term? I don't know what. And I was immediately I don't know who brokered this deal, but the Cardi B Offset adult Happy Meal at McDonald's, that to me was I don't know how it impacted the business, but it seemed kind of like a durably authentic thing with influence, big brands, obviously, those two. But the reality is there's a story, there's a connection. And so I want to kind of start to get to how do you decide what then is the choice of the audience, the creative idea, and to make sure that it's not coming off wonky or a flop that doesn't lead into the main thing, which is like the trust of the person who you're partnering with.
I love this question because it innately is asking, when you're operating in culture and putting things together in culture, how do you manage authenticity? Because you can do something that could feel authentic, but the execution is what we would say in New York, mad corny.
Or in Nashville, honky. Like, it's just like,
yeah, it's a little funny style, And I think that this goes back to strategy, and it goes back to people who are not just observing culture, but operating in it. And so you don't just pluck two celebrities from popular culture. You're also thinking about where are the values aligned and how are we managing what that looks and feels like in the creative execution. So a friend of mine did that deal that you were talking about, but like, I know that I don't have any insight into how they did their strategy, but just being a smart person that works in this business, I think that there's a line, and I think good strategy, just like going to a great restaurant, it's about the feeling. If you go into a great restaurant and you walk out like, man, I had a great time. Like, that was so cool. It was because the hospitality was on point and your expectations were met.
Food could be okay.
Yeah.
But if those other things are there, you loved it.
Yeah. You're like, I ain't never had a burger so good.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, yes, you have. Just because they gave their napkins to you and put it on your lap, you're like, oh, snap. Like, this is nice.
Black or white napkin. Wow, this place is amazing.
No, the bathroom smells so good. Like, they're candles. There's all these little touches that make it matter. And that's what strategy does, right? So like, when you think about even childhood experiences, there's a reason why it's an adult Happy Meal, right? Like, there's something about the inner child and getting rewarded. Most of us, when we went to McDonald's, like, that was a reward. From a child's mind, it's like, this is a reward. Parents' mind is like, I ain't cooking.
Yeah.
I ain't doing nothing today. Like,
it was super special for me growing up in Tucson, Arizona, and the hot metal slides in Arizona at McDonald's. You'd be like 10 lawsuits in an afternoon today.
Exactly. And being able to think about, where does it go when you're older? Like, after childhood, where does the reward for McDonald's go? Where I want a Happy Meal. Sometimes we still order from the kids menu because you're like, I just want to taste. I want a little something. I kind of want to see what the toys are. Like, that thing still exists in you, right? And so how can we pull that out and make something that feels like satisfies the adults, but still has the surprise and delight that makes you want to order that thing that isn't maybe typically on the menu, where it's like curated, where things in life like capsule collections and this, like, what about food? What about through a drive-through, be like, I want something that's a little bit curated, that is curated by somebody I love and know, and I trust their taste. And maybe they have a background kind of like me, and they would pick something I would pick. That feels good to the consumer. And so it's like, it's funny because like, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not getting anything from McDonald's, but I remember when I wasn't a vegetarian, and I remember what it felt like to get that burger. But, I trust that Cardi B has been to McDonald's before. Offset, or whatever his name is, have been to McDonald's before. And I trust that from their point of view, from when they were kids and to today, that they would be like, oh wait, it has to have that kind of sauce.
There was a real connection. It wasn't.
There's real connection to that. And I believe it did drive sales. But even if it didn't, the impressions alone, the sentiment alone, the brand loyalty alone is enough for a brand to continue to do that work.
I don't eat at McDonald's, and we're talking about it. You're a vegetarian and we're talking about it. So clearly there's some lift there with the brand. So I want to kind of circle to a really specific question as we start to kind of wrap this up. I feel like we could just jam for hours. So maybe we'll have to get you back, Tiffany, talk more about more tactical, more insights, cool things you're doing. But I'm going to assume something. I assume this type of marketing and partnership and leveraging the influencers or creators, or whatever, can be industry agnostic. And I think for me, a lot of people assume it's for consumer brands only. Like, I'm selling burgers, I'm selling makeup, I'm selling clothes. But can you talk to me? Well, one, do you agree that any brand can use it? Or is it only for consumers? Because if you disagree, then my next point doesn't matter. But if you believe that any brand can use it, What then is the difference between like a consumer brand, a direct-to-consumer brand that's trying to leverage these tactics and strategies of influencer and creator marketing? And what might be different, if anything, maybe it's not, if you're more like a company like Design Pickle, B2B services, and we're tech and we're going after buyers that aren't, making $10 purchases. Is there a difference? Is there not? Is it the same principles apply, or is there different things that you think of if you are getting those clients?
That's a really great question. I do think it's industry agnostic. However, what is not, I don't want anyone to come away from this being like, I can do it. I make Post-its, that's probably a bad example because I could see a lot of integrations of that. I had a friend one time, mom and pop dental practice, knows that because we live in this culture that influencer marketing is a thing. He spends his money on like Google and SEO, SEM, that sort of thing. And he was like, well, how can I use influencers to support my business? And this is where it gets tricky because, for instance, a dental practice can indeed use influencer marketing, but what also needs to be in place is strategy. Of course, you could say to any influencer, yeah, I can do your teeth whitening. Just come in here and I'll do your teeth whitening and post about it and call it a day. But what is that? How is it serving you? So I think it gets trickier when you are a company that maybe has a smaller budget and the money that you do spend on marketing is extremely intentional. So you have to be mindful of the other automations that might need to be in place for you to not only share more about your business, but also drive people through a funnel and doing that repeatedly. Like McDonald's can get away with a one-off campaign and call it a day and it'll do great. But for a lot of smaller businesses and ones that are kind of off the beaten path, you're going to have to manage your budget so that you can do something repeatedly and consistently so that you can get the payoff that you're looking for.
Right. And I think it's like, we have to measure every dollar. Like I do. I wish I could have the budget to go just do a fun branding campaign and a collaboration and call it a day and be like, yay, brand awareness, yay, impressions.
Yeah.
But we have to drive performance to every dollar we spend. And I think that's the case for SMBs, a lot of B2B companies, SaaS. But I think ultimately what I'm hearing is like, and you've said it a few times, and I want the audience to kind of realize this is actually what Tiffany's saying. Strategy, 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 strategy. Like nothing's going to work if you just go find someone on Cameo and hire them to just say, hey, I love this or do this or whatever. You got to have consistency. You might be able to test ideas. You might be able to see what organically lifts, but like to really do it, doesn't matter if you're Fortune 500, dental brand, weird design company like Design Pickle, the strategy piece is what makes this big deal. So Tiffany, I wanted to keep going, but I got to kind of wrap up because these churches try to keep these a little short and sweet, but I think there's a future for us to get back together. I have like 200 more questions about so many other things that we didn't get to. But my final question, Tiffany, is where can people learn more about what you're doing, your influence content you're creating, and be influenced and build a trusting relationship with you?
Oh, I love that. Find me on LinkedIn. I have a great newsletter where I talk about all things being an entrepreneur, being in influencer marketing, but definitely find me on LinkedIn, find me on Instagram, Tiffany_Hardin. My business is Gild Creative Group. So Gild creativegroup.com. And I'm actually launching a creator operations startup because I believe creators need to build more sustainability in their careers. So that's called Represent. You can find that at represent.biz. And I'm sure we'll put all of those links in your notes section.
What a perfect transition. Absolutely. So everyone listening, Tiffany, thank you so much for tuning in and hanging out. And we're going to have everything Tiffany mentioned, links to her businesses, her new projects, and social profiles over at jarofgenius.com is where you can get all the show notes, subscribe. And if you're a big influencer and want to lend your trust to me and Tiffany to share this episode, we'd love for you to do that. We're trustworthy and we'll represent your brand well. So Tiffany, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Jar of Genius, sponsored by Design Pickle. To learn more about the topics discussed, get access to any of the links mentioned, and submit ideas for future seasons, head over to jarofgenius.com. Now, if you enjoyed the show, you know the drill. A solid rating on your favorite podcast platform helps others find what we are creating and join the conversation. We'll see you next time, and never forget, creativity is your secret strategic weapon.